Before we get into this week's episode, I have a very special announcement I'd like to share with you all. As my valued listeners, I wanted you to be the first to know about the inaugural Women and Wealth Catalyst Summit that I'll be hosting in 2025. I hope you'll join me and some other amazing women on March 27th at the Golden Gate Club in San Francisco for a full day of impactful sessions, including fireside conversations, intimate panels, and engaging discussions with values-aligned partners. Do not miss this opportunity to ignite your path to financial success and become part of a supportive network committed to achieving wealth. Reserve your spot today at women.win. That's right, ladies, women.win. And join us for a day that will shape your financial future. If you can't join us in San Francisco, be sure to stay tuned for New York City dates and venues soon to be announced. I can't wait to see you all there.
Welcome to Getting Rich Together, the show for successful women who are looking to take their financial futures to the next level. I'm your host, Shama Bunton. When I started my wealth building journey, nobody knocked on my door to give me all the answers. So I want to talk to the experts who've done it and bring the answers to you so we can discover the right opportunities that will help us achieve the financial futures we've always dreamed of together and have fun doing it. So let's dive into this episode and start getting rich together.
In today's episode of Getting Rich Together, I am joined by the incredible Coco Brown. Now, what I love about this episode is Coco talks to us about what it was like growing up as a young adult in Silicon Valley. Coco cut her teeth at Taos, where she held positions for 17 years. Manager, VP, president, COO, and board member. She then went on to hold on a number of advisory positions and other roles before she launched the Athena Alliance in 2021, where she is the founder and CEO. I am so excited for everyone to hear the story of Coco Brown, how she's thought about navigating things throughout her life, and ultimately what her legacy is in being able to activate and nurture 20,000 plus C-level women, VCs, and CEOs. Let's dive in. Coco, you not only are spearheading the Athena Alliance and helping more women become successful on corporate boards and building their portfolio of board and career service, but you've also been in Silicon Valley now for 30 years, and you are just a pioneer and a powerhouse. I am so excited to have you here on Getting Rich Together. Thank you for being here today.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Coco, obviously people today hear and see you speak on stages, talk about all the incredible things that you're up to with women and board service and really building out legacy, I think, within women's lives. But obviously you were once a little girl and maybe did not know that this was going to be the path. Take us back to a young Coco. Where was she living? Where was she growing up? What were her parents like? And what was money like growing up?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was born in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and my family was very, late 60s, early 70s, hippy dippy, very hippie. I ran around without a lot of clothes on a lot of times. And we moved to the United States when I was about 3.5 and to an area of the country called Oxford, Pennsylvania, which is really, it's Amish country, it's dairy farms. At 50 years ago when that happened, it was the middle of nowhere. And we moved to an 80-acre non-working farm where, the hippie kids could run around. And that's what we did. My parents were academics. My mom worked in nursing and she was the breadwinner. My dad, for most of my little life, didn't have an income. He was refurbishing old buildings on this 80-acre property that had, these buildings had been not lived in for 100 years. I mean,
how cool! Like, that's so cool.
Super old. I remember as a little person getting picked up at half-day preschool by my dad, and he'd set me up in one of the buildings and I'd watch him while he was carpenting, doing all the carpentry work. And he'd let me flick the chalk on, the blue chalk on the drywall panels and hammer nails. And I was my dad's carpentry assistant. And we did not have money that like we had this incredible playground of this property that my brother and I could just run around on, and it had a creek running through it. And I got a hatchet for learning how to swim at the age of like 7. And I mean, we were definitely wild kids, just wild. But the interesting thing about my parents is I always knew I was going to go to college. That was something that was kind of drilled into me from very, very early days. And both of my parents, they both went to Penn, Ivy League. They both went to Oxford University for higher degrees. So my mom is Mensa, she's also got a scholarship to study at Penn and a scholarship to study at Oxford. And she came from very, very, very not low income, but like, middle class when middle class could work in the 40s. And my growing up was not a wealthy growing up. It was wealthy in experience, these intellectual parents and this sort of like free for all lifestyle. And by the time I was a teenager, my dad was very much getting us to travel, gave us a tiny little duffel bag and had us travel for a month at a time, and very, very, very definitely bed bugs and questionable washing of sheets. And, we were traveling through India and China and all over Southeast Asia and Europe, and, just a lot of exposure. Yeah. So that's kind of, I could go on, but that's
wow. What a remarkable way to experience the world and see happiness and life and different sorts of people around the world, and have this like eyes open way of saying, wow, there are so many other ways to be happy and so many other ways to create joy in life and experience. And what foresight for your parents to be able to say, hey, like this is the time to really broaden the horizons and
Yeah.
see that like everything is, so kudos to them. Like that's
Yeah. It wasn't 4-star traveling. It was a lot of like just raw seeing all of these different cultures, the way these cultures live, like very, very raw. And that's because my dad is an intrepid traveler, and that's the way he likes to travel. And so to your point about happiness, like it's interesting. Like our version of happiness was not 4-star hotels, and it wasn't that at all. It was exposure and experience, culture and food.
so amazing. So then at what point did you decide, okay, I'm ready to go to university and I'm going to study psychology? What were some of the dominoes that fell that led you towards choosing this as a major?
Well, my mom studied psychology, and she was a psychologist, and ultimately she ended up getting her PhD in family therapy. So I kind of always knew I was interested in the people side of things, but I never wanted to. And my dad, ultimately, by the time I got to college, he ended up as a professor, an adjunct professor at Penn, and he taught strategy and long-term planning. And he was an economist. There was a big, long period of time where he didn't work at all, but he wrote books, and he was picked up by the UN to write a book about commodity and trades. In fact, that's how I got my name. My name is from the cocoa bean, because he wrote a book on the commodity called cocoa beans. But so, I had these parents who never had worked in the corporate world. My dad, for like a year, it was like 2 years actually at the UN. And he hated it. And he called it walking through the halls of the great. And he had an office. And he was like, the office is like the worst place you could put my dad. So I had this like anti-office, anti-corporate structure sort of element. I had this psychology from my mom. I had my dad, who was like world traveler, economist, just a very, unique person. So I don't know, somewhere in there, I knew that I wanted to go into business and the corporate world, which is crazy because nobody in my family did. My brother ended up being an artist, but I loved going to visit him at the UN and watching him push papers around and have paper clips and staplers. And so I was like, that's it. I want that. But I want to do it from an angle of a people angle. And so, yeah. So when I started, I actually for the first 2 years of college, I went to Westchester University because my mom was teaching there. And so I could go for super, super cheap. And so I did. And then I, made sure I had the grades and everything. And I transferred into University of Pennsylvania and graduated from Penn with a psychology degree. I took a lot of business classes and contemplated a path towards law at one point. But really, I knew I never wanted to do clinical work, but I wanted to go into business and figure out how to grow businesses, motivate people, build new things, all from the angle of how people tick.
Yeah, I love that. I studied economics and philosophy in
Oh,
university,
wow.
and it was motivated by a really similar sort of drive, which is how does the world work and how do people like to engage with themselves in relationship to the world? And so it was really fascinating because similar to this motivation around psychology, it's really like this very macro way of thinking about, how things operate and move and then being able to, I felt at the time, hold the secret keys to then being able to leverage and make that work. So that's
Yeah.
it's so neat. And so as you were graduating university and I'm sure your parents were surprised that you decided and wanted to have a career in business, but as you were graduating and thinking about where to move next and what to do next and starting to get your feet into the world, what was that like for you? How did you decide where to live? What were some of the key motivators? And ultimately, how did you finance the next steps?
Uh, well, the first thing I did, it was pretty funny because I don't know what was going through my head, but I got myself a one-way ticket to France and I had no plan and a backpack that was way too heavy. I didn't realize the whole ratio of weight to backpack thing at the time. And I literally showed up in Paris with no plan. I didn't even realize that Charles de Gaulle Airport was like an hour commute outside. And it was like 6 p.m. and I didn't have a place to stay. And I was just following in my dad's footsteps. But I ended up, long story short, with an unpaid internship at the UN and working for the chief economist of the trade organization. And it was fascinating. And I just, kind of solidified my interest in like, wow, money and trade and people and business and that kind of. But I also, right before then for the summer, I had taken a paid internship with a bank card services division of Wachovia, and I did compensation analysis for them. And it was awesome. I got to look across the entire organization and figure out all of the comp leveling and job ranking and then attaching the people to the right job rankings. And it was super awesome. And I ended up doing that also in California. And I came out to California because I was following my then boyfriend who was getting his PhD from Stanford. And I was like, that's a 5-year program. So I better follow him because otherwise, like, we're not going to be together. And so I did. And I had no idea it was Silicon Valley. I didn't know anything about computers, nothing. But he taught me, and I used Fetch and Gopher in early days of the internet. And I taught myself HTML and it was pretty awesome stuff. And I ended up working for a consulting firm on HR consulting and doing a lot of comp analysis and even including board comp analysis, which was kind of wild. And I started making like super decent money from a very early age. From my point of view, it was like really awesome. Right. And so then next thing I know, I'm talking to my mom and she's talking about this credit card bill she has. And I was like, what's your interest rate on that? She's like, it was like, I don't know, something outrageous. And I said, what if I charge you half of that? I'll pay off your credit card and you pay me the interest.
Get out.
And she's like, deal. So I paid off her credit card bill and she paid me back at a lower interest rate. So that worked out really well.
And how old were you when Coco the banker came out?
That I was 23.
Oh, okay. So the foresight that you had I mean, these are things that parents want to do for their children. And here you are able to provide this as an opportunity for your parents. Like, what a gift, what an ability to understand how markets work and interest rate works. And then also, I just want to highlight here, by looking at compensation 360, you've essentially been preparing for the work that you're doing now
your whole life. I mean, it's really like, I mean, not to skip ahead, but it's so incredible to think about just how things have really progressed. Okay, so you are Coco the banker, you're 23 years old, you're you're helping out your mom, you're making good money. Where is the money going? Where are you spending it? Are you
Yeah.
saving it? Like what's going on in the money world?
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember I then took a job for a company called NetFrame, and it was a public company, and they had this like I forget what it's called, but like a stock purchase plan. And so you could every quarter or month, I forget, you could buy their stock at a discount and then turn around and sell it if it was raising. And so I was like, this is an awesome plan. So I'm going to max out that. And then I learned about 401ks and how, if you put in the maximum amount by this much, by the time you're 20 years later, I was like, okay, max that out. No brainer. So maxing that out. And this is where my dad, kind of came into play because he had certain like mantras. He'd say, Coco, you always invest, you never touch the principal, and you make sure that you only touch enough of the growth that you're continuing to grow, right? Like that's basic. And you put your money into mutual funds or, not individual stocks, and you just watch the Morningstar directory. And if it changes, then you move it and you look at it once a year and that's it. And then, the third was don't ever carry debt. Don't ever buy what you can't afford. And those were kind of his rules. And I was like, okay, got it. Right. So I applied that from day one. And like, I was so proud because I never carried a credit card. Like I paid my credit card off every month. And my mom's, by this point, my parents were divorced. And so those kinds of behaviors and habits were in me from the very beginning. And I remember like, I also chose a bad mutual fund that was like growing like crazy. And then I lost half of it in the dot-com bust. And, there were things like that where I didn't pay attention to the right sort of things, but I got kind of like sucked in on the massive growth of this high risk mutual fund and not, but so yeah, I was playing with those kinds of things when I was in my 20s. And and then I also have always been an entrepreneur. So I also built a product that I sold. I tried to get venture funding. I talked to exactly one VC who was like, nice product, kid. It's a really great idea, but there's like literally no adult supervision around you. And so I sold the product to a company that's early in the HRIS, like outsourcing space, and for like 80K and no royalties or anything. So, so I was like building up a kitty and, and investing. And
did you have any ideas, Coco, like what you wanted the money for or goals or things to do? Or it was just like, this is fun and I'm enjoying the process. Like, how did you feel and what was sort of motivating around these?
Well, early days, it was things like, it was like, I wanted that Jeep Wrangler and I wanted that really cool apartment in San Francisco. And, but I'm not like I'm not a big shopper. I'm not, so it was mainly that was like fun to watch the money grow, and also be able to, I was very supportive to my brother through some, he is an artist and, rice and beans. And so I was doing max gift mounts to my brother and just trying to make sure that like that I felt like a good contributor in my family as well. But then I met my now husband, and we've been together for 25 years. And I had this like literally, it was the year 2000. And all of a sudden I'm like, I need a baby. I got to have a baby. Like I just wanted it. I was like not even 31 yet. I was not even 30. I was 29. I'm like, okay, I want a baby. And you look like a great, partner here. We weren't married. We had no plans to get married. I was like, but I would like a baby. And he's like, okay, I'll accommodate. So that kind of became the thing, and we actually had decided that we didn't need any money. We were going to we bought a Vanagon, and we were these hippie parents. We were going to drive around the country with our Vanagon, and he was going to put a little satellite on the top of it and sell, internet access. That was our plan.
So what happened? What?
Golden handcuffs. That's what happened. I was at the time working for a company called Taos, and I had risen very quickly in the ranks. And I was the vice president of professional services for the company when our son was born and the dot-com bust hit. And, we had planned in the good old days, like our CEO was handing out caviar and champagne at Christmas in 2000. It was like, these are the good old days. And my husband and I are like, good, we're going to buy a Vanagon. There's the 10K. We saved up money. We're going to travel. And then the dot-com bust happened. And I was making, in my view, outrageous money at the time. Like I was 28, 29 years old when I started making $250,000. And that was back in the 90s. And so like, to me, that was like, huge. And we didn't really want it. We weren't really like, that wasn't what was so much driving us as much as like this idea of this fantasy of this life with this little kid and moving maybe back to the farm. And then when the dot-com bust happened, I ended up laying off like 90% of our staff, and the two owners of the business came out of retirement and said, Coco, we want you to do a turnaround and pull the phoenix from the ashes. We want you to be the COO. We'll give you ownership in the business. We'll give you, a great salary and bonus off of the growth and blah, blah, blah. And so we were like, okay, I guess we'll, golden handcuffs, I guess we'll go. And we thought it was going to be a 3-year plan. And they were like, we're going to sell the company in 3 years. And so don't worry about it. And you'll make, $3 million. And I was like, $3 million sounds great. And so that happened. And that was when I was 31 years old. And I ended up becoming the president and CEO of the company, like CEOing the company. I was the only report CEO. Everything reported to me. I grew the business back up to 54 plus million in revenue by the time I'd stepped down. But it was not 3 years, it was 10 years. And it was an exhausting 10 years. And there was a lot of like ups and downs in those 10 years. And, and by the time I stepped down from running Taos, I was 42 years old. And I stayed on the board 2 more years and then sold my interest to the other 2 guys and went to create my own thing. But those 10 years were soul sucking in certain ways and very, very difficult in a lot of ways. And there was a time after those 10 years where we floated my 401k and we fire sold our house and we slept on people's couches like that. I've had a roller coaster of wealth and non-wealth, and because we were completely self-made, didn't get money from parents or anything.
Of course. And so as you were sort of looking at this tenure at one company, and really at a certain point when you're at the top, there's nowhere else to go. You're at the top and you're responsible up until that point. As you were sort of ascending into the role that you would then keep for some time, were you of the mindset to keep negotiating every time you went up for, a review every year? Were you of the mindset of, let me keep working towards this bigger title? Was it a lot of ambition that was driving you that sort of led to this eventual co-CEOing president sort of role? Or how did you sort of find yourself, and what kept you so dedicated for those first few years? Because today, Coco, as we know, it's hard pressed to find someone young these days who's willing to stick it out longer than 2 years at a company, right? Yeah. And here you were so young and sort of ascending and growing and committed in many ways. What was it like for you during that time?
Yeah. Well, I've always been extremely ambitious. I'm extremely driven. I'm very like, if I don't know, I'll figure it out. Which isn't to say that I don't have imposter syndrome and a lot of self-doubt. I definitely do. I'm definitely not immune to that at all. In fact, I think most of the time I'm doing the wrong thing, but I'm just going for it anyway. And I can't help it. I'm compelled. And I have been since I was 28 years old, either the top person or reporting to the CEO. And even before that, I was reporting to the CHRO or, so I've sort of always spent my career at the top, like reporting to the top person or a C-suite person. And certainly for the last 25 years I have. And my ambitions were always like very much like if I'm, for example, when I became the VP when I was 28, it was following someone who had failed in the job, and the CEO gave me a bump along with the title. But I was like, I'm pretty sure that's not what James. And so, 6 months into it, I went after lots of crying and convincing myself that I was failing and like figuring out how to actually succeed 6 months into it. I went back to Bill Dwyer and I said, hey, Bill, am I doing the job he was supposed to do? And he said, yeah. And I said, as good as him? And he said, yeah. And I said, then pay me what you were paying him. And he was like, good point. And that's when I got this, like the most outrageous, I never would have asked for it. I didn't know what to ask for other than pay me what you were paying him. Right. And that turned out to be like the right strategy. And so I've always kind of approached it that way, like board roles or consulting things. Like I've always sort of like, well, what are you paying over there? Because if you're paying that, then you should pay that over here. And so I definitely focus on the right positioning and title and compensation. And I think one of the things that I try not to do, it's hard with fundraising, which is something that we are doing, I've been doing a lot of in the last 3 years is fundraising. It's hard not to get caught up in the stats, like less than 5% of female founders get to Series B, and less than 2% of venture funding comes to women. Like it's hard not to let those stats get in your head and get in your way of just making things happen. But I've always tried to like, just what is this job worth? What should it be worth? And am I getting paid what it should be worth? But I've also done the opposite. I was the one who argued really hard with the other two. Now, my two business owners during the Great Recession, I was the one who said, we have to cut our salary. Before we cut anything in the business, we have to cut us. And they were like, no way, no, we should cut everything and then hunker down. And we just fundamentally disagreed on that philosophy for a while until, they were like, okay, they came around and was like, look, if we do this, we'll build more goodwill. We won't have to cut as deep. We'll cover faster, all these things, and which turned out to be true. So I'm not, I love what my friend Christine says about being filthy enriched. It's not all about money. It's about, karma and character and, sometimes giving things up so that others can succeed and so that you can fight for the right things too.
I love that. That's beautiful and noble. During the time that you're speaking of around, the highs and lows of your own personal finances or navigating the weathers and the storm, what was that like for you guys as a family unit? How did you approach and talk about, okay, this is either something that we're going to be coming up against. This is something that's going to happen. Here's how we navigate this. What were the family conversations?
Oh my God. Okay. So we had bought an incredible, I don't know, it was like a Disneyland house in Los Gatos. And it had a 50-foot water slide, like an industrial water slide. And big, huge Nana doors that open. It was just an outrageous house. And we lived in it for less than a year and a half because something happened. And this is the time when I had to float my 401k and just fire sale the house. And it was crazy. And I remember sitting down with the kids and it's like the paint had just, dried on the walls. My daughter had painted her room. One wall was yellow and the other wall, it was kind of wild, but one wall was purple and 2 walls were pink. But, the paint had just dried. And I was like, hey guys, we got to get out of here. And so we're going to go live with your grandparents for a month while we try to sell this house. And I'm really, really sorry because I know how much, it was like our first house we owned too. That was the first time the kids had their own bedrooms really actually, because it's such a big story. But to answer the question you were asking, this is the most sort of poignant time was sitting down with these guys and going, hey, I know we just got this place and I know that this was our dream house and all of this, but we're selling it. And we're going to go spend a month with your grandparents while we do that. And they're like, yay, time with the grandparents. And Kai was 10 and Malia was 7. So, she was kind of like, what does Kai think? And Kai's like, well, Mom, if we got to do it, it's just a house, right? And it's just a house, Mom. And so she's like, yeah, what he said. And so then my brother-in-law put us up, literally, couch surfing, put us up in this apartment that we were sleeping on the floors all in the one bed. It was crazy. And the kids were like, this is fantastic. It's like camping. My daughter remembers it as one of the best experiences, way better than her pink, purple, and yellow room. And, because we were off camping and this, and surviving together. And it was super close. And I had to drive them to their private school like an hour away for a while. And it was great bonding time in the car. I mean, there was a lot of, it was really, 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 really a hard time. And there were definite stressors on our marriage, like that took its toll. But the kids were like, so our partners and so like, whatever, it doesn't matter, mom. And then we ended up renting a house here in Moss Beach and on a little street, with a little house and a little street and like all these cool little neighborhood kids. And it was just sort of quirky Peanuts gang. And it was totally different lifestyle than we had prior experience. But like, now we're like middle class people and living in this, like with our neighbors struggling to pay the bills and us too. And it was a wild time and a wild experience. But the kids looking at like this peanut butter costs this much and this one costs this much. We'll get the cheaper one. Like, the kids wouldn't trade it for a minute.
Yeah.
They wouldn't trade it for any, and they feel like they learned so much and feel so grounded and so worldly in their own way from that very difficult time in our lives.
And children are so, it's not even resilient, doesn't do them justice, because I think that they're creative and imaginative and can feel into the emotional essence of what is real and what isn't. And there's this level of importance that they can place on someone's inner being. Kids can feel when someone good or bad without them saying anything, right? It's like there's a genuine nature, and especially at that age. I mean, and this is, before all the kids had cell phones at school, right? So it's like it's a different also just world, I think, and exposure level. So how like magical for you guys to emerge from that experience with so much connectiveness and joy together as a family. That's really like, that's so powerful. And so coming off the heels of this and looking as your optionality and life is sort of making its way forward, and let's maybe sort of move to the point where, you are deciding to leave Taos and life is sort of starting to open up and take other shape. Having had 17 years of experience in one company is definitely that's a lot. It's like your own child in many ways, right? You've seen this child grow up. You're ready to graduate this kid. You're ready to be an empty nester of this business. What was it like to leave? What were the things that happened next? How did your identity feel around leaving something like this?
My identity was entirely wrapped up in Taos and in what I had built over those years. But I had created this dinner group of fabulous women, CIOs mainly, but also different C-suite functions. And that dinner group, when I left Taos, they said, don't leave us and let's keep it going. And that became my new identity, a professional identity. And they helped me, build up a consultancy and then build up the concept around Athena. And, we kind of did this like almost our personal PhD experience of like, what's going to take to get women on boards. And it was very enriching. And so it was like this great build back. And then my husband, who had been a stay-at-home dad for 16 years, he got a job at Databricks, which is one of the most valuable private companies in the world. And that was a huge break for us. Because then I was no longer just the single breadwinner, and it was both of us now. And, we tried other things. We tried a furniture business together and at one point, and then we were like, we can't make money at this. And so, so like we tried lots of different things. And again, the kids were there with us. And one of the things I think is really important given the nature of the show is, our generation, parents didn't talk to their kids about money. Like I still have no idea how much money my parents have, and they're both in their 80s. And it's like, this is ridiculous. Like I should know what your situation is, but all I know is where the trust is, or where the will is. And it's in a safety deposit box and where the key is, right? Like, but my kids know everything. They know how much money we have. They know where the money is. They know like how much of it's in the house, what would happen if we sold the house, how we could, rent the bottom apartment of the house. Like they know the house. They know why we're invested in certain things. They know the crazy thing their dad did and take $5,000 and throw it into Tesla and make it into 80,000. Like that was a kind of a cool thing. Like they know all those stories. They know the story of losing it and growing and gaining it back. And we talk about it as a we thing, like how much do we have? We're a collective, so because we've got to think about Kai's school and he's probably going to go on for a master's PhD, and his sister, we don't yet quite know what she's going to do, but so we're going to need to carve that money. And then when they do want to get houses, like we would like to help them with their first down payment. Like it's a different kind of world. And then teaching them how to think about money and how to invest even as teenagers themselves. Like anyway, so all of our financial challenges and them being so involved in it is part of what created so much openness in our family around money and what to do and how to approach it and how to nurture it, and also not be afraid when it's not where you want it to be and things like that.
That's incredible. And so as you're sort of looking at, where your resources now as a family and how it's evolved over time have been, let's say, distributed in the pie, has it changed? Has the allocation of things in different pie slices, if you will, has it gotten bigger or small? Like how have you sort of looked as a family at your investing thesis, including where we live or investing in education? What are those conversations like, and how does the pie look?
A huge slice of the pie of our, total net worth is in future value of our stock, between me with Athena and Scott with Databricks. So, that we're already heavily weighted in the private sector, high risk in that sense. And so also as a family, we've made a decision around where our wealth advice comes from. So we're working with a woman, a financial advisor who I absolutely love, who focuses on female. She really is focused on female entrepreneurs and entrepreneur wealth. And so, that's been like kind of a big theme for us today. That's very different than me in my 20s and us as a family in our 30s and 40s. Now in my 50s, like that's really important to us because of Databricks and Athena. And then, definitely a big chunk is already in this, like the kids are they're 23 and 19. So that's a big chunk of how we're thinking about short-term money is they're going to spend it for education. And then, they sort of contemplate, my son's been with his girlfriend for 8 years since they were 14 and 15. And, there's a very strong likelihood that will continue on. And my daughter's always been one who's like, I want to be a young mom. I want to be a mom in my 20s. So kind of thinking about things like that, like them nesting in their 20s as opposed to later, like what's that like, how could we support that? What's that might maybe look like in terms of some shorter term investments versus the risky stuff. Our house is a big one. And if it weren't for the kids being so attached to California, we would absolutely move our primary residence to Seattle. But we have made the decision that we're giving up that. We're going to give up a lot in taxes because of that. But we've got grounding here and at critical points in our kids' lives. And so, so those are some of the distribution things. I mean, we're still doing very much like the classic distributions of investment. I did put money into women's WCEO ETF, which is an ETF that tracks the 150 female CEOs on the New York and Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. So I think that's cool. It's kind of like how you would treat a small cap investment.
That's so neat. I love hearing how holistic and how involved money is in the family. I think that's so powerful. And as you've been building Athena, please share, what do your kids think is going on here? I think it's so incredible and neat when children get a chance to really see their parents step into entrepreneurship in a big way and see what it's like to invest in oneself and to really understand the value of how one person can make massive impact and change when things are really values aligned. What was it like sort of building up and continuing to build Athena, and how are your kids seeing this?
Yeah. I mean, they know their dad makes more than their mom because, and even though I had the much bigger career for most of their lives, I chose entrepreneurship. And, that comes with a pretty small paycheck until it doesn't. And so, so they're seeing, kind of that choice and, that it isn't all about like how big is your paycheck and that does have its trade-offs, but they also know when they ask me how I'm doing in my job that I feel a lot of meaning behind what I do. And that I think it's interesting because they don't mind their parents working as hard as we work because we work really hard all the time. They don't mind that at all. What they mind is when they feel a sensation that we're not happy. And when that happens, I think particularly with this generation, it's like, why then? Why would you do it? So I think for them, they're really happy that we're happy with it. My husband's on the cutting edge of AI. Like there's like very few people that have the kind of access to technological advancement that he does. Like with it, so that's, yes, he's working crazy, crazy hours, but it's the learning curve and the excitement around it is huge. And for me too, it's like, yes, but I'm engaging with, thousands of badass women and, solving a problem that's a real problem, regardless of gender around, the, the equity of who's running this world and why that's important. And that my son had an internship with us. So he, it's as interesting to him as it is to my daughter. And that's just fun and being able to talk to them about fundraising and marketing and like a whole range of different things, not just one area of the business.
That's so incredible. So tell me a little bit about legacy building for you, Coco. As we're looking at this body of work that you have embarked on, that you are building, the women's lives who you're changing, and not just in terms of them seeing their own power to change the world through board seats, but also the capital consequences of that, being able to start to see more portfolio careers with women and helping them really see how to leverage their skill sets to create change, create capital, and use that capital to then create more change. I mean, it's really a massive ecosystem here. Let's unpack a little bit about mission and vision of Athena and really this legacy that you're.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the biggest one, the interesting thing is that I think women sell themselves short by focusing on board seats, which is going to be a super controversial, like, what? Isn't that a big part of what you do? And I would say, yes, it's our Nike swoosh, but just like Nike is for performance, we're for impact. And you can't have impact and you can't build the kind of legacy and longevity and value of career if what your focus is on a linear path. And so what I mean by that is a lot of women will say, oh, okay, well, what's next? I guess a board role, which is super linear thinking, as opposed to doing something much bigger, like saying, you know what, as long as my brain and my body cooperate, even though I'm, aging into this place where maybe a lot of people would think about retirement or like winding down or whatever, that's irrelevant in today's world. So I may have a 60-year career, but my back half career, the next 30 years are going to look really different than the last 30 years. They're going to have a whole lot more flexibility for me. They're going to have a dynamism in the way that I can make money if I have to or want to. So I could serve on boards, but I could do advisory work. I can start a company after the age of 50. Look at me and Christine Heckard, right? Like both of us, she's raised more than me, but here we are starting these incredible startups after the age of 50. So why not do entrepreneurship? And by the way, if you do entrepreneurship, you have board roles, and then you can give board roles to people that, to other women as well. And as you're raising money, I'm adding 12 people to our cap table this month because I'm raising money right now. And it's awesome because these are members of Athena. And so when they become investors, they're funding the next generation things they care about, right? So the problem with this system as it exists today is like, if 98% of all funding goes to men, then we're still going to have the board seat problem, right? So women, we need to invest. Like a big thing we have to do with our wealth, any amount of wealth we have, is invest in other companies we care about. And that can be by a male founder, but start taking female money and putting feminine money behind things that we care about. So we have more than, Discord and Facebook and, like we have to have other kinds of businesses, and those other kinds of businesses that are going to provide opportunities for more, more leaders that are women and more, so the whole thing has to be a systemic thought process and legacy in, teaching at a local university and writing books. And, those are ways to send the elevator back down while making money. We're actually one thing I'll say on this, we're launching an investing course. We're launching an architecture second half course, and we're trying to get women to think more broadly than just board seats. Like, yes, get a board seat, but you're way bigger than that.
There's a whole ocean of opportunities. And I think that we get a chance to say, wow, here's the ways in which I can really create impact, legacy for myself. And I think ultimately, and this is one of the goals of the podcast, is to give women an opportunity to see what's possible. Because there are so many things that are possible, and we just don't know because we aren't hearing it. People aren't talking about it. And things are still under hush, hush, closed doors. And so opportunities to be able to see what's possible, I think, is truly allowing people to have an expansive world of what they can do. And that's beautiful. Coco, my final two questions, one of them has to do with, obviously, we've spoken a lot about investing and where money goes and all the powerful values we can sort of drive alongside with it. Money is also really fun, and there are fabulous things we can do with it. And I would love to hear what are some of your favorite ways to spend money?
Oh, travel. I love to travel. Travel would be, anytime that the family gets to, we just came back from Croatia. I was in Spain. I took a quick detour 2 days in Lisbon because I have teammates in Lisbon, and we have teammates in Nicaragua. I love going to visit them and then making it a surf trip for my son while I'm working. And, travel, it's been just ingrained in me since day one. That would probably be the number one thing. I also love helping other people, particularly kids, so we have a sort of a foster kid, although he didn't come through foster system. But, helping other kids and giving, I feel like I like direct giving more than philanthropic through something else giving.
It's beautiful. And my final question, Coco, is in this big, beautiful world that we live in, we get to make asks of people, of the universe. We get to call in the next things in our lives. What is it right now that you are calling in? How can the audience support you? What do you need? What do you want?
I want Athena to be an incredible household name, which means, I'm really looking for curiosity. I want people to lean in and look at Athena and learn what we are and what we do. And I think it's particularly important because in today's world, everything's moving so fast. And to stay on top of everything as a senior leader, you need a pretty dynamic community to learn from, to tap into. And that is what we are building at Athena. So I would say that. And I think one of the things that I would ask of women is, one of the things I notice and have for years now is that men will way more readily invest in themselves than women. And so I would say, invest in yourself, whether it's writing the check to Athena or something else, like spend money on yourself, on your education, on, your career care, not just your self-care. Like spend the money to get the next piece of knowledge, to buy into the network, to, do things that get you exposure and an opportunity that you can't get by just performing well.
Those are excellent calls to action. I think if every woman just took the next step in what that meant for her, we'd see a lot of momentum and movement very quickly, and the world would change very fast.
Yeah.
Coco, thank you so very much for your spirit of generosity, sharing your life story, the things that you're up to, how your beautiful family has navigated through things. I think that there are so many just beautiful things to absorb and be inspired from. I'm so appreciative of you. Thank you for being here on Getting Rich Together.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super appreciative of you as well.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Getting Rich Together. Please take a minute to subscribe. And if you like this episode, I'd love it if you could share it with a friend who is ready to elevate their financial future. Until next time, let's keep getting rich together.